it's Sabine from Wonderbene. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. As always, it's great to have you here on my channel. This is a food for thought video, and this is a follow-up on last week's video on food addiction, and also a video about binge eating disorder, because I think it makes sense to combine those two. So first of all, that video I released last week, I absolutely stand by what I said in that video. However, I wanted to make a very distinct clarification here, and that is, when I talk about food addiction, to me food addiction literally means or implies that all food products out there, every food item out there, is somehow a drug, which I think in a literal sense is not the case, and that is why I think the term food addiction is a bit of a misnomer. I think it is possible to be addictive with food and to abuse food in a way that you would another addictive substance. And from what I've learned from many of the comments, Wendy, Destiny, Sandra, Louise, you all know who you are. What I did not realize is that there are people out there who have the urge to just eat and eat and eat and eat. And for me, that was always tied to high salt, high sugar, and high fat foods, never to just any food. So that is something I definitely learned from you guys. So thank you so much for broadening my horizon in that regard. And that brings me to this week's subject, and that is binge eating disorder, which, as I just mentioned, it can be not just to do with high salt, high sugar, or high fat foods, but I think binge eating disorder, and I'm going to talk just from my own perspective because that's the only one I really know, and I'm not going to make any assumptions as to what everybody else's stories are, but I would love for you to comment on what your experiences are so that we can make this a bit of a forum for people to share and for people to learn about that there are other people like you out there that suffer with the same thing, or that there are people who have a different story and a different train of thought and a different approach to healing it than you might have, or that I might have. So binge eating disorder for me has been something that's been present with me since I was a teenager. And the reason I know that it's because it's since then is because the trigger moment for me with my obesity, the first trigger moment, and there were two big ones in total. The first trigger moment for me was when my parents divorced at 16 years old. That was actually fine. That was not the trigger moment. But a few years after, my mom and I had been living together, two women against the world, so to speak, for a couple of years. And then she met a new man, and I was given the choice of either moving in with her, a new guy, or move back with my dad. And for 16-year-old me, that was really not a choice. I didn't want either option. I wanted to continue life as it was, me and my mom, strong bond going forward. But in the end, that didn't happen. So I ended up moving in with my dad for a few months, and it was a few months after that when I had finished my apprenticeship. I couldn't move out on my own at that time because I was only making a few $100s a month, because I was in an apprenticeship, which means you work full-time except for 1.5 days a week while you learn on the job and you learn a profession, basically. In my case, it was kind of an office fundamentalist apprenticeship, so I learned everything to do with supply chain, logistics, commerce, retail, marketing, and all that stuff. But anyway, this is not what this video is about. So I finished my apprenticeship, and then I moved out on my own with my first job, which was great. But that sense of abandonment from that decision where my mom said, oh, you can either move in with me, a new guy, or move back with your dad. That sense of abandonment is what I later recognized, probably about 5 years ago, through hypnotherapy and counseling. That was the trigger moment for me, and my abusive relationship with food, and my relationship with food as food being a friend, a comfort, and a dampener of emotions. So that is when I gained. I started gaining like crazy, and by the time I then moved to Canada in 2003, I was 300 pounds in weight. And the second event that made me gain a lot of weight, after I'd lost quite a bit of weight, down to 268 pounds, was getting into my relationship with my husband. that is still my husband today. And that is the whole, oh, I'm in a relationship now, I don't have to worry about what I look like or take care of myself. As illogical as that sounds to my brain now, today, that was the trap I fell into. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. When you get into a relationship and you get to that, hey, I'm comfortable in front of you stage in every possible physical scenario, you kind of relax, you get comfortable, which is nice. And I think it's an amazing thing to have a bond like that with someone. But that is when the weight come back. And with that came bad food habits, because both hubby and I had bad food habits at the time. And he introduced me to KFC and pizza, which are two things I had never ever eaten before I started going out with him. And that turned into us having Pizza Hut a few times a week, wasting a lot of money and a lot of nutrients that we were then missing because we ate crap. So those were my two big moments. And I think with a binge eating disorder, and the reason why I binged, it's not the mechanical aspect of binging that is the cause or the main thing. To fix a binge eating disorder for me personally was to figure out where it came from. How did I end up looking at food as something that would help me with my emotions, that would help me feel better somehow? And it took my entire life to figure that out. And I peeled back layer after layer through family constellation therapy, which is a form of energy healing, hypnotherapy, one-on-one counseling, psychological counseling with a counselor experienced with food addiction and food, what's the word? The word escapes me. Disordered eating, and through self-analysis and just slowly peeling away all these emotional tears and traumas that had latched onto me throughout the life that I'd had so far. Other things that flowed into this was having been bullied as a kid and being a bully as a kid, and being teased throughout my entire childhood essentially, being very lonely as a child and a teenager. All of these factors made up the cause for my binge eating disorder. So, and I know Destiny commented on how a food addiction or a binge eating disorder is not usually to do with what's in the cupboards so much, but it goes way beyond that. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. I wholeheartedly agree with that statement. I think if you think of someone who's big or obese as an iceberg in an ocean, you see the iceberg that sticks out above the water, and that's the body, that's the physical body everybody sees, and it's much bigger than every other iceberg around it, because not everybody's obese or overweight. But the really crucial aspect is what's under the water. What is pushing all that ice up above the water? What made it all happen? And oftentimes it's not a physiological thing. It's not a mechanical thing. The mechanical thing of eating too much and overeating and binging is often a physical. In my particular case, it was a physical representation of things that my mind didn't know how to deal with, or things that I needed to work through and figure out and put to rest, mentally speaking. And for me, the biggest closure I got in terms of therapy was through hypnotherapy. And for those of you not familiar with it, if you're interested, I'll make a separate video on this, because this will take a long time to explain. But in essence, she helped me kind of go back to me when I was 16 years old to figure out where it all started, why I felt the way I did, and how I could overcome it and forgive it, and gave me a chance to talk to my younger self and really assure myself that, hey, it's gonna be fine, you're gonna be fine after all of this, and let it go and forgive. You don't forget, but you can forgive. And the power of for letting something go like that is humongous. It's immense. And So that is my story with binge eating. And once I had peeled away all these layers of emotional hurt, emotional trauma, scar tissue, so to speak, I guess you could call it, I was able to then build habits, build them one by one. It started by going vegetarian in 2015, then phasing out some of the other foods, and now being a vegan allows me, without much effort actually, to avoid so many trap foods, all the high sugar, high salt, high fat foods, because they're not vegan. So it all kind of organically grew over the years. And so at the end of it all, I think binge eating disorder is very real. It's very hard to get out of that cycle of binge eating and out of the cycle of abusing food to try and make yourself feel better or try and compensate for an emotional trauma. And I am very happy to say that today, at 35 years of age, I have finally beat it. I have finally found that peaceful space in my head where I no longer tear up when I think of the things that were done to me as a kid. And no, I was not abused or anything like that. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to send the wrong message here. But there was some verbal abuse going on. And just... My dad was... My upbringing was one where I grew up with parents who were very blunt. And that is something that's in me as well, in case you haven't noticed. But where it was a lot of suck it up, buttercup, that kind of attitude. And while I appreciate that strong side of me that can suck it up when I have to, I don't want to be a person that sucks it up to the point where you're so jaded, so emotionless, and so cold to what you're feeling that you're not really a full comprehensive human being, because you're just pushing and banishing all these uncomfortable things. So that is my story with binge eating disorder. And I believe that taking that leap into all these emotional issues that are flipping hard to deal with and flipping hard to recognize and figure out is absolutely worthwhile. And this is my story. Other people will have different experiences, different stories, and for other people, trying to forget might be the better option. But for me, working through it all over the last basically decade or two is what really helped me get to where I am today. And I'm grateful that I found the right people to help me with it, that I happened upon the right counselor, the right hypnotherapist, and the right people in my life that would help me, guide me in the right direction, and that would support me in this journey. So, yeah. That is it for this video. This is a very deep video for me to make, because it's a very heavy chapter for me in my life to have gone through this and to finally put it to a close and kind of put a seal on it and say, hey, this is it. I'm all of these experiences, all that knowledge, and this is a picture that one of the hypnotherapists gave me, is think of all of these. She asked me to imagine a symbol of strength when I was in a session with her, and for me, I thought of a golden tree. And so the way I see all these experiences now, all the hurt, all the teasing, all the hurt I inflicted as a kid, as a dumb, socially awkward kid, I see that as the core foundation of my tree, with the roots solidly grown all over those foundation cubes, and making me who I am today in all the facets that there are to me, to my personality. And that in and of itself is a beautiful thing. It's a good thing, because, and this is a statement one of my friends made the other day. You know, it's okay to draw life in all colors. And I definitely draw life in all colors. I'll have black days, I'll have pink days, I'll have purple days, and sometimes my day is a flipping rainbow, because I'm so happy and so elated. But that's being human, and that's being in acceptance of everything that makes me, me. And I believe that more than ever since I started this journey, and one of the first videos I ever made was weight loss is mental. More than ever, I think that weight and weight gain and being overweight and obese so often has its source not in a physical space, but in a mental space, in a psychological wound or trauma or circumstance that we used to be in, and stems from something like that. Because I think primally, from a primal sense, human beings are not hardwired to overeat. And again, there are exceptions to that, because, well, there's millions and millions of us out there, so we're not all made the same. But for me personally, I was not born this way. I wasn't born an obese person. It was circumstance, life, experience, emotions, and what I was exposed to in my life that made me who I am today. And I can finally say today that I'm happy with who that is and who that turned out to be. And let's bring life in all colors and not be afraid of any of them, because they're all part of us. Alright, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.